In March of 2024, Rudy Gobert, the center for the Minnesota Timberwolves, did something you're not supposed to do. He publicly implied that sports betting is compromising the integrity of the NBA. He was fined $100,000 as a result. The real question is, does he have a point? Sports betting has become an integral part of the 4 major North American sports leagues, bringing in billions of dollars in revenue and being advertised in every conceivable way before, during, and after the game. This seismic shift in the attitude towards sports betting has happened quickly in just the last 6 years, as colossal money-making opportunities have become too much for sports leagues to ignore. But is it possible to protect the fairness and integrity of the game when officials and players could conceivably make money on games they are a part of? How we got here is the story of how technology, economic opportunity, lobbyists, and changing politics all collided to make an irresistible financial opportunity that changed how we interact with sports and much more. In 1992, U.S. Congress passed the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which essentially banned sports betting across the country, with the exception of Oregon, Delaware, Montana, and Nevada, which had legalized sports betting already at the state level. One of those who testified in favor of the ban was then NBA Commissioner David Stern. This was only 3 years after Pete Rose was banned from the MLB for allegedly betting on games as a player and manager. Pete Rose is an all-time great player. To highlight the severity of his betting scandal, he is one of only 2 baseball players to be on the ineligible list for the Hall of Fame. The other, Roberto Alomar, is ineligible for sexually assaulting a female staffer. Commissioners across the 4 major sports were unified in saying that sports betting had no place in the game and would undermine its integrity. But a number of factors started to converge in the 2000s that would change the landscape and open the door for sports betting. In 2007, one of the first daily fantasy sports sites launched. FanDuel came 2 years later, and DraftKings launched in 2012. Daily fantasy sports is a lot like fantasy sports, except instead of playing a full season with your friends for bragging rights and maybe a few bucks, you can pay an entry fee and pick a team weekly or daily, giving you a lot of opportunity to make, or most likely lose, money. It offered a gray area for sports betting, where bets could be placed that depended on real players and real games without actually betting on the outcome of the game itself. The rise of this format was in part due to the smartphone. Players could use their mobile device to gamify the betting experience legally outside of the casino. Anyone with half a brain saw the opportunity here. The MLB and NBA were 2 of the companies to give venture capital investments to DraftKings and FanDuel. In 2014, DraftKings became a multi-year sponsor of the NHL. In 2015, FanDuel reached an agreement with 16 teams in the NFL for their IP to be placed in stadiums, on radio ads, and on digital properties, and the 2 companies began aggressively marketing. In 2015, an ad for either DraftKings or FanDuel ran every 90 seconds on national television in the United States. It was estimated that year that fantasy sports was a $2 billion industry in the US, growing over 10% that year. The next year, it was worth over $7 billion. This was simply too much money to be left on the table. Various states began to argue against the betting ban in a variety of ways with limited success. Since 2010, New Jersey had been trying to find creative ways to get around the ban. First, the state overwhelmingly passed a referendum that would legalize sports betting in casinos and other authorized venues. Atlantic City was struggling, and this was an opportunity to help bring new revenue to casinos there. New Jersey was sued by the major sports leagues, and after a lengthy court process and a number of appeals, the referendum was overturned as being in violation of the ban. Then Governor of New Jersey Chris Christie and his experienced legal team took the issue all the way to the Supreme Court, asserting that the ban was a violation of the 10th Amendment, which is more or less supposed to give the power to decide issues like this to the individual states. Throughout the trial process, most sports leagues remained of the public opinion that legalizing sports betting would affect the integrity of the game. But behind the scenes, things started to change. As it became clear the Supreme Court was leaning towards repealing the ban, states and sports organizations began scrambling to get profitable deals in place for when the ruling came down. Several states had laws written and passed that were contingent on the Supreme Court's ruling. The Supreme Court indeed decided that the ban was unconstitutional by a vote of 6-3. After the Supreme Court's ruling, it didn't legalize sports betting, it just opened the door for states to legalize it if they wanted to. And so the next phase of the process began: lobbying. Betting companies from around the country, backed by sports leagues and casinos, mobilized an army of lobbyists across the United States to convince politicians not just to legalize sports betting, but to do so in a way that would give the maximum benefit to betting apps and sports leagues. Lobbyists showered politicians with money and gifts and made seemingly solid arguments about how sports betting would benefit the community as a whole. After all, for every bet placed, the government would receive tax revenue, and the lobbyists talked a big game about what those numbers would look like. The issue is that the lobbyists also presented deceptive arguments, that Americans were placing $400 billion of illegal bets each year, and to compete, state governments had to keep tax rates low and give tax breaks to betting companies. The end result in Kansas, for example, is that lobbyists got a very low tax rate, some money was put towards gambling addiction prevention, and 80% of the tax revenue was set aside for a new sports stadium, meaning that virtually none of the money made actually directly benefited taxpayers. Another downside for taxpayers is that the organizations in place to support individuals with gambling addictions, if you can believe it, don't bring in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year that betting does. States, in fact, have an incentive not to help people with gambling addictions, as increased gambling results in more tax revenue. Studies suggest that about 1% of Americans struggle with a gambling addiction, although those numbers are in reality likely much higher. The National Council on Problem Gaming estimates that the risk of gambling addiction grew 30% between 2018, when the ban was repealed, to 2021. In many states, it's legal for companies to use risk-free wagers, where customers are reimbursed for losing bets. These are designed entirely to hook individuals who might be predisposed to a gambling addiction. Risk-free wagers have been banned in several countries for this reason. In 18 states, risk-free wagers are tax-deductible for betting companies, meaning state governments are subsidizing a predatory promotion designed to create addiction. The social effects of sports gambling will continue to evolve, but let's get back to sports for a moment. Commissioners of various sports leagues embraced legalization, saying it was better for it to be legal and regulated than done illicitly. And there's definitely an argument there. But the key point was always that betting, if legal, should be done in a way that does not affect the integrity of sports. Many changes have happened rapidly in the last 6 years that call that assertion into question. Between NASCAR, the NBA, and NHL, players are signing lucrative endorsement deals with betting companies. Sports broadcasts have betting odds scrolling across the screen. Betting is being pushed as hard as possible before and during every broadcast. All of that points to a potentially dangerous truth about the increased prominence of gambling in sports, but doesn't mean the integrity of the game is affected. Players and referees are, of course, prohibited from betting on games, but that hasn't stopped them in the past, even when it was illegal. When Rudy Gobert was fined $100,000 for his actions and comments, a lot of basketball fans felt the punishment wasn't just for what he said, but for invoking the memory of one of the NBA's greatest shames. Tim Donaghy was a referee in the NBA for 13 seasons, officiating nearly 800 regular season games and 20 playoff games, including the notorious Malice in the Palace. In 2007, an FBI investigation revealed that Donaghy had been betting tens of thousands of dollars on NBA games from 2005 to 2007, using his power as an official to affect the point spread. The NBA monitors the performance of officials throughout the season, but Donaghy's betting was only discovered by accident, when the FBI stumbled onto him as part of a larger investigation. Donaghy was sentenced to 15 months in prison and was fined over $500,000. During the investigation, Donaghy claimed that he was not the only one to tamper with games. He alleged that 2 referees, on orders from the top, fixed Game 6 of the 2002 Western Conference Finals in order to increase ratings. He said this wasn't a one-off, that top execs often used referees to influence games one way or another to favor star players or make more entertaining storylines. His claims have been dismissed by the league and no hard evidence has ever come out to support them. Additionally, Donaghy is known to be an angry, vengeful man, and striking back at the NBA with baseless claims is well within his character. The one piece of intriguing evidence takes us back, once again, to Rudy Gobert. The referee that Gobert is signing at here is Scott Foster. Foster was voted worst referee in the NBA by an anonymous survey of 103 NBA players. But it's not Foster's unfortunate reputation as a ref that is relevant here, it's his relationship with Tim Donaghy. Between 2006 and 2007, Donaghy called Foster 134 times, most calls lasting under 2 minutes. The majority of the calls happened just before or after Donaghy officiated a game he had bet on, and many of the calls were between calls between Donaghy and Thomas Martino, who was the middleman between Donaghy and his bookie. Donaghy mostly called Foster on the phone that he dedicated to gambling-related calls, and stopped calling Foster abruptly once he stopped gambling. The prominence and legality of betting in sports makes it far more conceivable now that players and referees could be involved, and there are signs that they already are. In April, Jontay Porter, a center for the Toronto Raptors, was banned from the NBA for life after an investigation revealed that he had disclosed confidential information to sports bettors, limited his own participation in one or more games for betting purposes, and bet on NBA games. In one instance, Porter revealed confidential information about his health status to someone he knew to be a bettor before a game against the Sacramento Kings. The bettor placed an $80,000 prop bet that Porter would underperform, with winnings valued at $1.1 million. Porter also left at least one game early, reporting an illness, in order to influence bets placed on his performance. Porter's punishment makes him an example to other players, but let's call this what it is: addiction. Porter was on a two-way contract worth over $500,000. He was likely to be re-signed by the Raptors to a deal in the low millions. His total earnings from betting were around $20,000. I say that because it highlights how bad the problem can be. It's not a way to make fast money. You're likely to make far more money just playing the game. For many, it becomes a compulsion that they can't control. This has been exemplified recently in baseball, where one of the league's biggest stars, Shohei Ohtani, has been wrapped up in his own gambling scandal. In his case, Ohtani's former interpreter, Ippei Mizuhara, allegedly stole over $16 million from Ohtani's bank account to cover gambling debts he incurred betting on sports. Mizuhara is found to have averaged around 25 bets per day, worth about $13,000. He lost $40 million over 2 years. He could face up to 30 years in prison for felony bank fraud. These are just the two most recent of quite a number of betting scandals across all of the major sports since 2018. Betting is already affecting those closest to the game, but the question is, does the integrity of the league actually matter? Sports viewership is down severely over the last decade, in part due to the collapse of live TV, partially because people are watching less TV overall, and while the current and upcoming partnerships between major sports and streaming could change that, sports betting has been a goldmine in a period of decline for major sports. In 2023, sports betting posted a record $11 billion in revenue, a 44.5% increase from the previous year, and there are still several states that have not yet legalized gambling. Beyond that, sports betting makes viewers more involved, making games and fights that a viewer wouldn't normally care about into must-watch TV. Amongst the conspiracy theories and accusations that sports leagues are fixing games, they are usually alleging that they're fixing games to make things more entertaining, extending series or colluding in favor of big market teams. Sports, after all, are entertainment beyond anything else. If sports betting continues to make more and more money every year and give viewers a reason to tune in, leagues will continue to make it a bigger part of the game. The result of that is inevitably revenue, but also gambling addiction. And sooner or later, that addiction will affect an official or player, like it did with Pete Rose and Tim Donaghy and Jontay Porter. And each league will be able to look back and see how much their integrity really cost.